Hey everyone, welcome back to Beyond Nihility. In this video, we are going to be continuing with our brush properties and attributes. So in the last video, we tried discussing about the shape. I hope it's all clear to you. If not, let me know in the comment section on how better I can make you understand. With that being said, let's start with the today's video, which will be about the next attribute, that is grain. So I'm just going to click on this brush icon and I'll open the Brush Studio settings. So grain basically means the texture that is there within each of the stamp that make up your brush stroke. So when I open the grain interface, you can see that there's grain source, grain behavior, grain filtering and 3D grain behavior. And also when you come under grain behavior, there is something called as moving and texturized and various other options. So let's dive into each one of them. So the first thing is grain source. What is the texture that you want under each stamp? When you roll your brush like this, so when you create a particular stroke, what is the texture that you want inside each of these stamps that make up your stroke? So for example, here I have something called like a leafy or a grass pattern, whereas if you come to the shape, the basic shape of the brush is still round. So how do we set different textures to each brush that we are going to create? So we have something called as grain source, where we have an edit option. So if you click on the edit option, just like in shape editor that we learned previously in the previous videos, the grain editor will allow you to import different textures from various options. So if you click on the import, there are several options here, that is import from a photo, import from a file that is already present in your iPad, or the source library wherein you have several preloaded textures and patterns that are available within the Procreate. So the texture that I have here on the screen was imported from an image. So I just downloaded an image which looks like a grass or a leafy pattern and I just imported that image. So as we learned in the previous video, rotating will allow you to rotate the source itself, and tapping with two of your fingers will allow you to import the image. So you can see that there is an additional option here in the grain editor which was not actually there in the shape. So this particular option is called auto repeat. So if I click on auto repeat, what it basically does is it repeats this tile pattern. You can see that there's one tile over here and the same tile has been repeated. It sort of gives that tile effect to your grain. So this particular option is helpful if you want to create that seamless pattern, like for example, if you're creating a pattern which is like the bricks. In that case, auto repeat will help you repeat the same pattern multiple times and brings out that tile effect. So if you can see, there are various options over here which you can set to make the pattern more seamless. So the first one we have here is grain scale. So grain scale will help you determine how much zoomed in your grain should be within each tile. If I move it all the way up to maximum, you can see that the particular grain is a little more zoom, and if I reduce it to 1, I do not have any zoom on my grain. So there's also an option to rotate the particular grain which is present within each tile. So you can use it if you want to rotate the grain. There's also an option to set the border overlap. This will help you set how much overlapping that should be there between each tile. If I set it all the way to maximum, there will be maximum overlapping between each tile. You can see that over here. And if I reduce it, there won't be much of that overlapping effect between each tiles. There's also an option to sort of blend the overlap between each tiles. So if you set it all the way to hard, then the blending between each tile is sort of hard. And if I reduce it all the way to 0, the blending effect that is there between each tile is sort of soft. There's also an option to mirror the overlaps. For example, between these two tiles, the overlap is somewhere over here. So if I turn it on, it sort of mirrors the overlap that is there. You're not able to notice it here that much, and it also depends on how fast your iPad is. Sometimes if your iPad is a little bit slow, it's really hard to see where exactly the mirroring is happening, but this option will sort of give you that kaleidoscopic effect. The next option that we have is pyramid blending. Pyramid blending will come into picture if your grain is a little more complex, for example like a woody pattern or a woody structure wherein there are a lot of curves and dents. In that case, if you turn the pyramid blending on, the blending between the two tiles will be much more smooth. You won't be able to notice the pyramid blending much on simple patterns like this. So that was about all the options that are there in the auto repeat. Right, now coming back to the brush properties that are there here for grain, we have something called as grain behavior. So this will help you set how your grain should behave as in when you draw a stroke. We have two options here. One is moving grain behavior and another one is texturized. First, we'll discuss about the texturized. In order to understand the difference between moving and texturized, let's take an example of a stamp or a paint roller. So as I do not have the paint roller and stamp with me right away, I'll just take an image and try to explain you how the texturized will work first. Imagine sort of like a paint roller that you have with the heart stamp that is there. So what happens when you move it across a sheet of paper or on a wall? If you move it, it sort of creates these repeating stamp on the flat surface. So this is exactly how the texturized would work like in Procreate. When we come to moving, it sort of behaves like a stamp. Imagine you have sort of like a stamp over here with the same heart pattern, and if you take a sheet of paper and if you just move the stamp, what it does, it basically smears all the paint that is there or the ink that is there and will create sort of like a single stroke wherein the patterns won't be uniform like with the paint roller. So remember this example because this is going to help us understand the texturized and moving a lot better in Procreate. Right, now coming back to Procreate app, the first thing that we have is texturized. So I'm just gonna clear the drawing pad over here and we'll draw a couple of strokes. So the first option that we have here is scale. So as you can see, as in when I'm moving the scale here, the grain that is there is zooming in if I increase the scale, and if I decrease the scale, it's sort of like zoomed out. So this will help you set how big your grain should look like within each stamp. Next we have depth. So depth will determine how harsh your grain should be within each stamp. So if I set it all the way to max, the grain that is there inside the brush stroke will be much more visible, and if I decrease the depth, you won't be able to see much of that grain. Only the shape or the stroke of your brush would be visible. So next we have blend mode. So under blend mode you have various options. So this will help you determine how your grain should interact with paint. So the next thing we have is brightness. So this will help us set how bright your grain should be within the stroke. Next we have contrast, which will help you set the contrast of your grain. Next we have grain filtering. So grain filtering works the similar way as in shape filtering. So we have three options here: no filtering, classic filtering and improved filtering. So no filtering will sort of make the edges very harsh, and classic filtering will sort of reduce that harshness, and improved filtering is somewhat that has been introduced in the recent versions of Procreate, which will give much more of that smoother effect for your grain. Next you have something called as 3D grain behavior. This option will come into picture if you're creating 3D models or 3D images in Procreate. So if I set it to off, in case if I draw a stroke with some grain in it, and if I move my camera angle to view the other side of the 3D object or a model, your grain won't be repeated there. If I set it to on, your grain kind of follows the camera angle, so if you move around the 3D objects, your grain will be present over there. So that was all there was under texturized. Now coming to moving. So under moving as well, you have various options. So the first option under moving is the movement itself. So this will help you set how your grain should behave once you draw a stroke, wherein you are actually moving from one point to other point on your canvas. So I'm just gonna clear the drawing pad over here. So I have the movement set to rolling, that is all the way to maximum. So if I draw a particular stroke, you can see that the grain that is there inside my stroke is still kind of like uniform. So when I reduce the movement, you can see that the pattern is kind of smeared off. Again, to understand this better, let's take the example of the stamp that we had. So what exactly happens if you set the movement all the way to maximum? In real life, that would be the similar effect of lifting the stamp each time you want to place a pattern. So this will still sort of try to maintain that uniformity between each grain. Now if I set the movement all the way to left, then it means that I'm not lifting my stamp, rather I'm just taking a bit of ink and just smearing it all over using the stamp. Right, so coming back to Procreate, there's an option to set the scale as well in moving. like we had in Texturized. So this will help you determine how zoomed in or how small your grain should be inside each stamp. While the option scale will help you determine how zoomed in or how zoomed out your grain should be, zoom is something that will help you adjust the grain size based on your brush size. So for example, if I set the zoom all the way to the left, it means that it should follow the brush size. So based on your brush size, your grain should be either zoomed in or zoomed out. If I set zoom all the way to the right, it means that no matter what your brush size is, the grain in it should always have the same size. The next option that we have is rotation. So rotation will allow you to rotate the grain that is there inside each stamp. Next we have depth. Depth again determines how visible your grain should be inside each stamp. Next we have something called as depth minimum and depth jitter, which are kind of interlinked with each other. So first discussing about the depth jitter. So depth jitter will add that randomness to the depth. That means few of the grain in your stroke will be having maximum depth and few of them less depth. And then you have an option to set the minimum depth and the maximum depth. You also have an option to set the offset between each grain in your particular stamp or a particular stroke. If you set this particular offset jitter to on, it means that you want that randomness between how many times your grain has been stamped itself inside one single stamp. Next you have blend mode again, which will work the similar way as in other properties. That is, it will help you determine how your grain should behave with the paint. And then you have the brightness and contrast, which work the similar way as in they work with the texturized. So that is all we have in grain. So understanding grain will help you create texturized brushes. So if you want such kind of brushes, for example, a gold foil brush or an alcoholic marker kind of brush, understanding grain and setting it to the proper source and properties will help you create a great textured brush. So that is all we have in this particular video. So in the next videos, I'm going to be discussing about the next two attributes that are there. So if you've made it this far in the video, consider hitting that subscribe button. It'll keep me motivated to make more videos for you guys. And also leave a comment if you found this video helpful or if you have a suggestion on how better I can improve these videos. I'll see you in the next videos, and as always, try out whatever we have learned in this video by yourself so it'll help you understand these concepts better. Take care. Bye bye.